So just to get us started, I'd love to hear a little bit about each of you. So Alissa, could you kick us off and tell us, who you are, what's your current role, what does your company do, and then just something fun about you outside of work.
Sure, I will start. Yes, I am Elisa Livingston. I'll try to be brief, but I am the Director of Finance Business Operations at Hudson's Bay Company, which we internally also call Chief of Staff. So I'm Chief of Staff to the CFO. And my role is basically to help find ways to expand profitability. So I work with all the different finance functions from budgeting, securing capital from banks, venture capital deals, and then I work with how the money is spent, so capital expenditures, general expenses. So all in all, I do a lot of data analysis, I do a lot of presenting analysis, I do a lot of strategizing with a large group of people at my company. And my fun fact is that I take trapeze lessons when it's warm, so not when it's cold, but when it's warm, I take trapeze lessons, and it helps me with staying creative, feeling alive, feeling inspired. So that's my fun.
That is really fun. It sounds actually fun to participate in. So I love that. Amy, could you keep us going?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Amy. I'm a data scientist at Shopify, located in Toronto. So Shopify is a leading global commerce company. We provide the tools to help companies at any stage, from a brand new startup all the way to some of the world's big brands like Allbirds or Heinz or Gymshark to manage their retail business. I work in a group that's called Core Build. So we provide the tools that developers, both within Shopify as well as within our whole thriving ecosystem of external app developers, rely on in order to build applications on top of Shopify. So we work with some really big data sets in terms of being able to track some pretty low level data about the calls that those apps are making. So spend a lot of time instrumenting the right logging, building pipeline jobs to process that, as well as analyzing it on the other end. A fun fact, I once had a summer job raising houseflies for the summer. So if you ever need someone to whip up a mean batch of artificial horse manure, I'm your girl.
Oh, keep that in mind. I don't have a person for that right now, so I'm glad that's changed. Lara, can you keep us rolling?
Absolutely. So hi, everybody. Lara Tromba. I am a solutions engineering manager at Google, specifically at Google Cloud, which is focused more on helping companies through different software applications modernize their existing infrastructure. I actually focus very specifically on Looker, which, if anybody doesn't know it, it's a data analytics platform. And if you've never heard of solutions engineering, really what the role is helping prospective customers to figure out what solutions, what applications might make sense for them. And in the context of Looker, and specifically on the technical side, helping customers actually analyze their data, evaluate whether it's going to, help them move their business forward. It's hard to follow up those two fun facts. I have a lame fun fact, which is in my free time, I love to bike, road bike, mountain bike, really any Peloton, really any type of biking, but big biking fan.
Love that, and a great way to stay active in a pandemic. Last up, Treveni, can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. So I'm Trevani Gandhi. I am oh my God, I just got a new title. Senior Industry Data Scientist, Life Sciences and Responsible AI, Esquire / whatever. No, I'm kidding. But the idea is that at Dataiku, and Dataiku is an end-to-end AI solution for not only ingesting different kinds of data sources, doing the prep, the cleaning, modeling it right there, then and there, and then deploying it out. Pretty low code solution, but with a lot of fun and interesting ways to also use code for like people who are, on either side of that divide. So It's a really fun product, and once I started using it, I was like, how did I do data science without this? But now in my new role, I'm working primarily on pre-built solutions around life sciences and ingesting or sort of like injecting responsible AI into different parts of our product and messaging. So yeah, otherwise as a data scientist, my role was more customer facing, working with a lot of different kinds of customers on their exact needs, what they're working on, like what they're trying to do with their data, infrastructure issues, figuring out the right collaboration, path for themselves. So a lot of different experiences and very varied, not as much focused on a single objective goal. I think in the same way as working at a single company. Fun fact. I am sort of a master of none, I like to say. So I pick up a new hobby. If anyone's ever seen 30 Rock, Jack Donaghy predicts Liz Lemon picks up knitting every year for twice a week, 2 weeks. Yeah, that's me. I have knitting needles, art stuff, painting stuff, gardening stuff. Now I have digital art stuff on my iPad. I can't stop. I can't just get good at anything, because if I'm not good at it right away, I abandon it. So, fun fact.
No, you were in a great position about a year ago, just ready for lockdown, already prepared.
Oh, I had everything I needed to entertain myself for a year.
That is wonderful. So I know we've got a lot of beginners or potentially people looking to transition into analytics in our audience. I'm going to go backwards this time. So Trevani, could you tell me a little bit about your path into the analytics field? What got you started and how did you get where you are now?
Yeah, so I actually did a PhD in political science. And while I was doing my degree, I was very much on the qualitative side. I was like, oh, all of this quantitative political science is all mumbo jumbo. We don't need it. We need to get deep with people. And then in the course of doing my dissertation, I ended up collecting a lot of survey results, wanting to graph them and really put some nice visualizations to use. So I had taken some courses in Stata, but I taught myself R just for the purposes of graphs. And then, moved from there into different kinds of analytics roles. Ended up as a data analyst in a nonprofit that used primarily R, and then thought, well, I'm already in this space. Let me look into this data science stuff. Taught myself Python, machine learning via Coursera, all that, and then landed here at Dataiku. But it wasn't easy, because not having that experience on your resume is really tough. It is really tough. And you just got to do a lot of those side projects and get yourself out there to prove sort of your abilities.
That's very insightful. Lara, how did your path come together to land as a solutions engineering manager at Google?
Yeah, so I'll touch on something that's very similar to Trevani, which is it was unconventional. In that I actually studied neuroscience thinking I wanted to be a doctor. And my program actually was very, statistically focused. So I learned R in that program, and I did work with quite a bit of data. But soon after realizing I did not want to be a doctor, I actually pivoted into consulting. And because I had that background, and because I knew I liked working with data, and had a very research mindset, I very quickly tried to get on, data projects. And so some of that was teaching myself some of the skills. I had used R, but I hadn't used SQL. And then really finding people that would take a chance on me, and trying to take on more and more responsibility in those consulting projects. So after doing quite a few projects with analytics, I pivoted to working at Looker, and worked at Looker in this role, which is a really unique combination of working with customers and working with data. And then about a year ago, Google actually acquired Looker, and that's how I ended up at Google. So again, would just echo the same, which is it was an unconventional path, and it took a lot of self-teaching and creativity and finding the right people who would take a chance on me.
That's really interesting. One trend I've always noticed in the data space is everybody's on an unconventional path. The conventions are hard to find. Amy, how did you land where you currently are?
Yeah, definitely some common themes here. For me, it was kind of a mid-career switch. I'd been working for many years as started in software development and a little bit of a systems analyst, and then got to a point where I just was looking for a change, to take on some new challenges. I took a few courses here and there, like some online courses, continuing education courses at some of the local universities. But it was hard to get focused. Like, it was just such a big, broad field. And I was taking courses a bit in data analysis, a bit of machine learning, a bit on managing analytics. And I wasn't sure how to take that and turn that into an actual career path. And coincidentally, that General Assembly that summer started offering their data science boot camp here in Toronto. So I joined up for that very first cohort. And that was very helpful for me in terms of giving me focus and actual projects and things like that. And then at the end, I was extremely fortunate to get hired here at Shopify.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Elisa, what was your journey like?
So let's see, I'll add similar, right? I don't think there are a lot of people who take the same path that I did. So I think I'll just try to add some stuff that hasn't been covered, but I studied engineering. I studied mechanical and manufacturing engineering. So I thought I wanted to design car engines. And then at graduation, I decided it was not going to be fun to be on a machine shop floor. And I took a job in technology consulting. And the way I convinced Accenture to hire me was I talked about my experience in coding machine cutting and shaping equipment. And that is kind of how I told the story of I've never built, applications or enterprise integration. I don't know Java, but I know logic, and I've applied it to problem solving. So, they did give me a job. And then when I was on that job, I just kept raising my hand for things that were interesting, even if I didn't know all that I felt I might need to know to be effective on the project. So I always was able to kind of tell the story of how what I did know and how my attitude towards challenges would make a great combination for the team. So one thing that I'll say is that, you can always find what makes an entry point a good entry point for you based on the skills that you do have and the attitude that you have. From there, I just continued. I got an MBA, which allowed me to transition into retail. I spent time in the buying office, which is a lot of data analysis, but also vendor negotiations, a lot of store operations. So in addition to gaining data analytics skills and practicing and utilizing them for my business, I also just continued to build other skills that just made a great combination to give me opportunity to continue. So, and then eventually went to project management with Hudson's Bay as Hudson's Bay acquired additional retailers and real estate, and then eventually chief of staff for the CFO. So also an unconventional path, combination of education and experience, but really, I think all of us here have probably had to really tell someone why we would make a great addition to the team, regardless of any deficits we feel we have at the time in skill set. You can always learn these skills, right? It's more about telling the story and having the right attitude sometimes.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, some common threads I've picked up on. All of you raised your hands, asked for more responsibility, took on more, and all of you leveraged what you already knew to sort of push yourself forward to pick up new skills, which is really fantastic. I want to pivot a little bit. Amy, you mentioned working with data for developers at Shopify. What sort of metrics are you building out, and what's helpful for them? What's helpful for you?
It's a good question. I think it depends very much on the particular team that we're working with at the moment. A lot on adoption metrics are probably some of the most common ones to see. We roll out a new feature, how is that being adopted? Usage of various features. yeah, like that would be the big ones I can think of at the moment. That I can.
Great. Alissa, you mentioned looking at metrics to drive profitability. What sort of metrics are you looking at and what sort of analysis does that involve?
So within each of the different functions, those teams focus on some of their key metrics that have to do with the projects that they're working on that are supposed to drive profitability. So it varies across teams, but the common thread is, what do things cost us? And what opportunity costs are we taking on when we do something differently? So that could be things like for stores, if we have a new initiative where, a big one in retail is buy online, pick up in store. But then the next component is how do you turn that person into a store customer as well? So how do you upsell? What do you upsell? How do you know what they bought online? Can you get information from their email address or their credit card on what they've purchased in the stores, what they like, what their sizes are, what categories they buy for? So a lot of times we'll focus on KPIs or key performance indicators that show how do you convert into more sales? How do you convert into more profitable sales? So a store associate might look at that customer history and then equate to how do I upsell? Where someone who's in the buying office, they may look at it a little differently. They're still looking to improve profitability, but now they might see that, okay, people who buy online and pick up in store, what they're looking for in store is a lot of beauty products. So how can we maximize our beauty assortment so that we have on hand some of the most desirable but most profitable items, so that when the person comes into the store, the sales associate can upsell to these specific items, right? So a lot of the things that we measure come from a lot of different systems. We've got to get online information, store point of sale information, customer loyalty information. And so a lot of times my role is helping to synthesize what is available throughout the entire company and how to package it into measurable things that mean something to the very different audiences that are all in a part of making us more profitable. So a lot of different metrics, but they all have a common theme that I'm always looking for.
That's very interesting. And it's always interesting to think about retail analytics in particular as a consumer. I think most everyone can relate to that because we've all been the shopper on the opposite side of that. Treveni, with the product that you're working on and low-code data solutions, how do you see data tools and data work changing in the next couple of years?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's only going to become more open for more people to be a part of these conversations and these analytics. I think, especially with the low code and what I like, and I'm trying not to just sell Dataiku to you guys, but like what I love about our product is that it's very collaborative and it's meant to make it easier for people who just need a report or just need some quick insights to come in and like make use of the high-end data science, the more complex code stuff, really easily and let folks communicate with each other. And so the clients that I've seen that are really successful with it are actually able to break down those sort of silos. And even Alissa, like kind of what you're talking about with, okay, what can I package up and get out to other folks? Putting it all in a central place, you've got access to all your data. So now the product owner, the business user can come in and say, oh, okay, yeah, like this data set you're using doesn't actually make sense. It's easier for them to say that because they can just go in and look at it and see what the coder's doing and not be like, I'm not reading your R code. I'm not reading your Python code. And so it's nice. And then there's all these other things with like traceability and being able to like govern these massive scale projects really well. And that's where the responsible AI piece also comes in with making sure we're making things explainable and open and transparent and not black boxing everything.
Yeah. Lara, do you have more to add to that?
I mean, I would echo the same, which is like we're entering into a world where there are so many more solutions that make it easy for people who don't know how to code, but understand the business to get those, the answers to the questions they have as it pertains to the business, right? So, if you think about all the different business units, if you think about sales, if you think about marketing, right, or product, there are so many different questions that can be asked of the data, and there are so many different data sets. And there tends to be a divide in terms of the people who really intimately understand the business and the questions that need to be asked, and those that have the skills to actually ask those questions and answer them with data. And so I'm very excited about the future in terms of, empowering people who don't have that skill set to be able to get those insights that they need to make better business decisions.
Yeah, actually, could you elaborate that? How do you enable your users and your customers in your case to do their own analysis?
Yeah. So when it comes to the Looker data analytics platform, you can really think of it as a software that actually writes SQL queries on behalf of their end users. So it does require a technical person who's going to basically teach the software how to communicate with the database. And what that allows for and enables is, again, those business teams to go in a really simple, user interface and ask those questions of the data, right? And instead of a data analyst having to do that work manually and there being a lot of time and, delay there, right? And a lot of manual work, right? Now the software can do it on their behalf.
Yeah. Does anyone have any experience maybe with some users who are less data savvy or the lower level of data literacy? Do you talk about how you overcame that to enable them for their analysis?
Yeah, I mean, I think Lara and I are like front lines sometimes because we're working with customers that are buying these tools to actually like start maturing their analytics and AI pipelines. At Dataiku, or at least our main goal is when you buy this product, it's not just like dump it and run away. It's really about enabling the user and finding the specific use case that's going to work right for that team or for that group, and guiding them through the process of like, okay, you guys need to, increase your sales in stores by X amount. Well, how are we going to do that? Let's backwards map. And that's where then that collaboration piece between folks who are heavy with analytics and those who are actually just really like subject matter experts in that domain, linking them together is often the best way.
I would add, we have a very similar approach. And I think another way that I like to help people who aren't, who haven't worked with data as much is like, first, just figure out where they are. What tools have they used? What are they familiar with? And really try to meet them where they are to explain things in terms of their context. If they've used Excel before, show them the things that are very similar to Excel, right? But I think as much as possible, just having as much empathy as possible and figuring out where are they right now and how do I speak to them in relatable terms.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Amy, I'd love to hear a bit more about your work in data science. Could you start talking a little bit about what makes data usable and how you can consume it and get insights from it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, a lot of it is probably very similar to what we were just talking about, and that the usability really comes from having clear documentation. We have a really nice system that our data team put together that lets you trace the data through, like from the source into the models, into the reports that are using it. So you get that complete visibility. Also, it has like example queries and things like that. So when you're just trying to get oriented and figure out a data set, then that helps you get going. On the data collection side, like getting usable data, I think it's something we spend quite a bit of time with in terms of working with the engineers and trying to think about how that data is going to be used down the line in order to make sure we're collecting all the right pieces of information that we might eventually need to join up with, other, pieces of, that data that's coming from other sources.
Yeah, that's great. Trevani, do you have anything to add from your role?
Yeah, I think again, it's a lot of it is around examining your data. So often I see customers aren't in charge of actually the data collection, or they have no sort of like sight into that. It's being dumped into some bucket, into some place for them. And so you can't just pick it up and run. You do need to first interrogate it, right? Where do we get this data from? Who does it include? Does it include the people that we need to actually target, or the whatever units that we're assessing? Does that actually include all of that? Does it actually have anything useful in it, or is it all empty, or is it all one kind of value in like 30 different columns? And really starting from those baselines to make sure your data is as tight as possible. I really, like, it pains me when I see customers come and say, well, we want to put these 1,700 variables in our model, and your software doesn't allow us to do that. Like, yeah, it doesn't, for a reason. And we're not gonna, that's when you really have to be like, okay, but we could do that, but half of these variables are empty, or they only have one value. So why would you use them? So again, just exploration and like qualifying things as much as you can, I think.
And I'll just quickly hop in here too. I like to, so Treveni, you mentioned this earlier, but start with like the business problem. So like, what is the big question or problem you want to address, right? Like, do you want to figure out how to make marketing spend more efficient, right? Like, start at the high level thing and then work backwards on like, what is the data, where does it live? How do we work backwards? And a specific question that I like to ask once we've done that is, if somebody were to look at this data, what is the next action that they would take? What would they do with it next? Because if the answer is nothing, then it tells me it may not be that actionable and that useful. And it's a really good litmus to figure that out.
That makes me feel more confident in my own workday, because I asked that exact question like 4 hours ago. Alissa, anything to add to this?
I was just going to quickly add, Laura kind of touched on it. So from a business user point of view, which is, I deal with a lot of the end users for our implementations of dashboards or new reporting. And the question that we always try to lead with is, at the end of the day, what actions are we trying to make decisions on? And can we empower the team to make those decisions faster and more independently, because they have the skills and the confidence in doing the analysis themselves, right? We try to shorten the path from, I've discovered some insight that's going to drive our business in the right direction, to the strategies at hand, so that we don't need to have committee after committee or meeting after meeting. So whenever we're trying to target a report or a dashboard or a tool, it always comes down to, kind of what Lara was saying, working backwards. Like, this is the action that I need to address, like, and how do I get there with the right data that's reliable, that's timely, and then how do I understand utilizing this tool, whether it's Tableau or an in-house report, so that I can independently feel confident in my decision.
Great. So next, I'd like to hear a bit about tools, just because there's so many different tools available to us, whether it's going to be coding in Python or R or SQL, or more visualization oriented in Tableau or Python or even Excel. For each of you, what's your go-to? What do you reach for first? Treveni, could you start us off?
I mean, I reach for Dataiku, to be quite honest. And I will say, okay, so before Dataiku, right, it was a lot of R and just like getting deep in there and data tabling. And my last role, they used Tableau quite heavily. So that was nice to be able to like throw things up there. But end of the day, like, all of the munging was happening in R. Now I just use Dataiku, and it's really amazing. And I'll stop pitching. I'm sorry, I can't. It's just like inherent in me. I should join the sales engineering team, Lara.
I think you'd make a great fit.
Yeah, Lara, what's your go-to?
So I'm very similar in that I would reach for Looker, because that's the product that I'm focused on. I did use Tableau quite a bit in the past. I think the big difference is something that actually Treveni also already hit on, which is a lot of the data manipulation and a lot of the analysis and analytics had to happen before it got to Tableau. Tableau was really that way to make the data beautiful, and to tell a story with it to business stakeholders. With the Looker platform, so the back end, there's a language that's based off SQL. So in using that, I mostly work in Looker, but writing SQL.
Amy, how about you?
For me, it's probably mostly pandas. Fall back to Jupyter Notebook in order to be able to really dig into the data, throw up some visualizations, and do the manipulations that I want to do. Some things are easier in SQL, but generally I find it easier just to go to pandas and work it out there.
Alissa, what's your go-to? And is there anything specialized that you like to use for finance?
So for finance, a lot of our analysis will be in Excel. So I've been using Excel for all my adult life. So I feel really comfortable there with, smaller sets of data. I'm also in a unique position in that I kind of have to stay current and flexible with lots of different tools because I have lots of different stakeholders that I work with. So I also use SQL. I partner with teams that heavily use Looker. So I have to know a little bit, I have to know enough to be able to work well with them. I use Tableau. I also love Tableau. It's kind of where I would go first because it is a beautiful visualization tool. And a lot of, what I do is telling the story to convince buy-in and drive action. So Tableau is a great go-to for me as well.
Yeah, and for our audience, if you're not yet familiar with any of these tools, I've used nearly all of these. They all have their purpose, and I think you'll see some preferences are weighted largely based off of function. So the finance world has used Excel for a very long time. I work in data engineering, so it's largely SQL and Python. That's not necessarily a better or worse, just what makes sense for your space. To follow up on that, when you're hiring for your data team, what sorts of skills are you looking for, whether that's hard skills or soft skills? Alissa, could you kick us off?
Yes. So I am probably going to be the biggest advocate for soft skills based on my industry. Nothing in retail is like a solo endeavor. So a lot of the time, if someone doesn't have as much experience in the data analytics tools that we use, our organization has a culture where we feel that we can teach people those skills. So a lot of the time, what we're looking for are people who have a great attitude, because I think everybody here knows that there are times when you are mired in an analysis that is it is difficult. It is never ending. You don't have what you need and you have to start over. And also, I also look for people who have a little bit of that, I guess, zest for a challenge, right? Like they're brave, they're not afraid to make mistakes, they're not afraid to own their mistakes, because no matter how long you're in, this field, you're going to make mistakes if you're a human. So I look for people who kind of have that excitement and energy for a challenge. And as long as they have some background and some skill that shows that they, can apply logic, they can apply a framework or a method to, their analysis. That's also, just as important to me as coming in and having all the skills in the world, but not being able to communicate or not being able to work with a team. I should also probably say here, which I didn't say in the beginning, I also teach the data analytics part-time course at General Assembly. So I'm very comfortable with working with people who don't have all of the hard skills packaged up right away. And, I know what it looks like to watch people grow in acquiring the data skills. So So yeah, I look for that combination of attitude and outlook, as well as some foundation in the technical skills.
Amy, what are you looking for when adding new members to your team?
Yeah, definitely a lot of the similar things in terms of that growth mindset and the attitude. A lot of the interviews that I've been participating in have been we do pair programming interviews, so we tackle a problem together. So really looking for how the candidate approaches the problem. Are they thinking about corner cases or exceptions, or how would this scale? How engaged are they? Like, is it a good give and take, and things like that.
Thank you. Treveni, how about you?
Yeah, I think Alissa really hit the nail on the head. For us, it is like much more of a customer-facing role, and at least in the data science side. And so it's not, yes, having technical experience is important, but also just like being able to communicate is huge. And I don't think that's just actually a Dataiku thing. I think any place that you're doing analytics, you need to be able to communicate and not get like if you just want to sit behind a screen and not talk to anybody, you probably shouldn't be in analytics.
Yeah, Lara, what do you have to add to this?
I mean, I think a lot of it's been covered. We definitely look for problem-solving skills. And personally, I just want to reiterate what Alissa said that is so important, which is a desire to learn and challenge yourself, because I think inevitably we're all working in a space that is inevitably changing, right? And so the tools that we use today may change in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, right? And so, for that reason, I think desire to learn, to challenge yourself is one of the most important. And then, of course, there are the hard skills that we look for as well. Experience in working with SQL and other, data, solutions and languages. But I would just, again, reiterate, it goes so far in interviews if you show that you are the kind of person who is interested in learning and has taught yourself something before.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Lara, with like the fact, I saw a question somewhere that like, what's going to happen with low code, no code tools coming out? I think, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, no one knew that the term like data scientist was going to be a thing. Or like that it was going to be Harvard's sexiest job of the year or whatever. And 10 years from now, there are going to be jobs that we haven't even dreamed up yet. Yeah. And so focus on what those tools can give you in terms of like getting all of the gross, boring stuff out of the way, aka data cleaning, and what insights are you learning? And to that same effect, get subject matter expertise in something. Are you a finance person? Are you a healthcare person? Whatever it is, take it from the master of none. Go become an expert in something, and then learn how to use analytics for it.
Thank you. That's really insightful. I'm going to pivot now to our Q&A section. If you're in the audience, feel free to keep sending in questions. But first question on this list, how do you manage expectations of scope in data reporting and analysis? Lara, you look ready to answer.
I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier, which is get all the people who are involved in the reporting or analytics or in the decision-making process into a room and figure out what the scope is. And try to document that as much as possible, because it allows you to go back to that over the course of a project. And I think it's good to be flexible and pivot, but at least to say, hey, we all, set out to build this thing, right? Or solve this problem. And, let's do a sanity check. Does this fit into what we were, what we originally wanted to tackle? And if not, that's okay, right? But what is the priority here? So I think it's just getting everybody in agreement and documenting those and checking in as over the course of a project.
Does anyone have a different process? Awesome. All right, so next up, we have a couple questions about working in data as a woman. So more women, especially women of color, coming into the data field. What suggestions or advice do you have for women of color in particular working in data? Alissa or Trevani, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I can start with this one. So I've worked in, as I mentioned, a couple of different industries. I interned in engineering. I was in tech consulting, and before I made my way to retail. Retail, is a great environment because there's a lot of diversity in retail across, all different types of demographics. What I would advise though is, start to join communities that will help you and support you. So you can find communities out there that are all, that are groups of women who are in analytics. You can find organizations that are, structured around ethnicity. You can also find groups that are structured around specific tools, specific industries. So, one of the things that I definitely advise all of the students that I have is, your education doesn't end after the classroom. Go out and find, network and find groups of people who are going to make this journey fun for you. So the other thing that I would say is I grew up in Kentucky and I'm a talker. So I end up just eventually talking to everyone. And so I have also found mentors who you would be surprised that that person was my mentor, because looking at us or maybe knowing us seems like we have nothing in common on the surface, right? Like a big age difference, gender difference, language differences or primary language difference, whatever it could be. But by meeting other people, right, I have been able to find my own community of supporters and mentors, as well as advocates. So even if you are in a group that doesn't look like you or doesn't identify like you or seems like they don't have, that common denominator, talking to people who have an interest in data analytics is your common denominator, or data science, right? And so just finding your tribe in this data journey can definitely help you overcome some of those things that can be problematic, like your gender depending on, where your environment, or race depending on your environment, or anything else like a disability or a learning disability or preference. Any of those things you can overcome by just finding a community within data.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. And I struggle with this because I see so many women and women of color around me who are like, I don't know what to do, like, or I'm nervous or this or that. And I've always just been kind of like a dummy who just goes in and like, what's going on? Like, and I've never, and it's stupid. I've never thought of myself as a woman of color. And like, I am certain that I have been subject to the same systems, but like, just like been too dumb to realize that's what's happening. And I don't think that that's going to apply for everybody, because some people are deeply aware of these things. And so like, my advice is not, of course, like, oh, just ignore it. But, if I can be spicy, carry yourself with the confidence of a mediocre white man. Like, I got this life sciences role and I don't know anything about life sciences. This is totally new for me, but I'm just going to figure it out. And so I think part of it is like just knowing that you know your stuff. And I saw, again, questions on imposter syndrome. It happens. I have imposter syndrome like 3 times a day. Okay. But like, you just say, okay, it's a syndrome, move on, right? Just keep doing it. If I didn't know what I was doing, I wouldn't be where I'm at. But don't use that like sort of like false confidence as like an excuse to skimp on like knowing the right things too, right? Like, keep pushing yourself so that when you go out there and you present that confidence, it's backed up with what you actually know. Because otherwise you get yourself into a bad situation where you like overpromise, underdeliver, which I have done before.
Thank you. Lara, Amy, anything to add on advice for dealing with imposter syndrome or gendered microaggressions in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I would just echo, I think so many people have imposter syndrome and it doesn't even fall along gender lines. I've had very successful men tell me I have imposter syndrome and been like, what? You have it too? You know? And so I would just say definitely have had it a many times a day as well. I think very similarly, just taking a step back and instead of being so critical in the things that maybe I don't yet know, also taking stock of all the things I have accomplished in that day or in that week, right? And the other thing I would say is in addition to finding a community, find advocates. And again, those don't always fall along gender lines. A lot of the people I've worked with and a lot of my advocates have been men. But that has helped me so much in, empowering me and getting over imposter syndrome, right? And showing me that I can do things that maybe I thought I couldn't do. So yeah.
Yeah, I think just echoing what you said there about noting your accomplishments. Certainly early in my career, I found it very helpful to keep a documented list of things like day by day or week by week that were accomplished and shipped or done, because that just gave me something I could look back on and say, hey, I did these things, or going into discussions with my manager, reviews. That was just having that there was extremely helpful.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Next up, we've got a couple questions in the chat about non-traditional backgrounds. So one about finding organizations that are willing to hire someone who's self-taught and still growing, and also about promotion trajectories if you don't have that master's in computer science. Any tips on how to grow your career and start your career without those hard credentials?
I can start on that. I think building up a portfolio is really, really important, and especially taking projects that have a look and feel like a real world project. So not just taking a nice clean Kaggle data set, but going out there and collecting your data, getting nice messy data that you have to clean up and merge together. And especially if you have a project where you can think of picture a stakeholder or a point to the project that you're going to pitch or present this to at the end. I think that makes a much more compelling story to present to an employer when you get to an interview stage.
I'll jump in and add something to this as well. I think that there's a lot that you can do if you're self-taught, to display what you've taught yourself and what you've accomplished. So one of the things that I love to come across when I'm interviewing people, and that I see more and more, but still not to the point where everybody's doing this, but I think is like a definite advantage in your resume or when you're interviewing, is I love coming across people who've entered like these data analytics or data visualization challenges or competitions, even if they didn't win. And Tableau Public, for example, has a lot of great communities, but they have an annual competition called Iron Viz. They've got other groups that do like Workout Wednesdays or Makeover Mondays. There are so many things out there that communities of people in the field are doing to help each other or showcase their work. So if you're self-taught, I think one great thing that you can do, and kind of to Amy's point about having a portfolio, is put yourself out there, like enter a data competition. And even if you don't win, you have what you built. You can talk about how you built it, you can talk about how you've improved it after you didn't win, or you can talk about, it just shows that you have courage, it shows that you are serious, it shows that you've really put together on your own a bunch of skills that allowed you to be competitive. So that's something that I still don't see a lot of, but there's a lot of opportunity to participate if you've taught yourself, that puts together a portfolio that you can speak to when you're looking for a job. And this helps even if you don't, especially if you don't have an opportunity to display those skills in your job setting, your current role or roles in your company. It's an arena for you to showcase what you've taught yourself. So I think that's an overlooked opportunity right now.
And I'll just add, don't discount the value. Again, I think I said this before, of like being an expert in a non-technical way with the field you're in. Because like that's, all of us could go out and learn whatever Python analytics, right? Or R analytics. But if I have no idea what manufacturing wafers means, right? Like what good are my analytics? So don't be afraid to sometimes take a role that maybe is less on like the analytics, like dream job, and more on the understanding how the data drives business, or working on the business side of the data question first before moving more into the data side.
Yeah, so really no one here started their career and came out of school intending to work in analytics. Laura, could you start us off on this? What's a piece of advice you would have given yourself, or something you wish you'd done differently when you were pivoting careers?
I think I would have told my younger self to have more confidence and not be so hard on myself. But at the same time, I mean, it was a motivating force for me to like teach myself to work harder. But I think sometimes just being overly critical can be detrimental.
Amy, how about you? What advice would you share?
I don't know. It's an interesting one. I think just jumping in and I took what the first job I could get doing it when I got out of school, and it took me in directions I never expected, and just being open to that and seeing where things lead. I had no particular trajectory in mind, and it took me down a pretty interesting path in the end. So you don't know what you like really necessarily until you get doing it. So
yeah, that flexibility is really helpful. And I know it's hard when you're coming at it at the beginning to not want to plan your whole career. But it rarely goes according to that plan, and might be better than what you had ever thought of.
And sometimes,
Alissa, go ahead.
I was just gonna add, I mean, sometimes you think you like something and you get into doing it, and like theoretically it's nice, right? And then you actually like do the thing and you're like, wait, I really hate this. So I think that's really good advice, staying open-minded.
Absolutely. Alissa, do you have any advice to share?
I would say, well, I have children, so I give my children a lot of advice. And I think one of the things that I've found myself most recently telling my oldest, who is she's 15, my daughter Madison, is I tell her that she's got to just be her own biggest cheerleader and advocate, right? Like I tell her whatever she'd tell her best friend to like convince her to do something, or convince her that she's worthy, or that she's all those things that you tell your friends, right? She's got to practice telling herself that. And I think no matter how long you're in an industry or working, or working for yourself, working for others, trying new things, learning, going to school, whatever it is you're doing, I think learning how to be your own best cheerleader early on can help with a lot of the things that inevitably happen, a lot of the setbacks or surprises, things outside of your control, things inside of your control. I think I was just lucky in that I was a little bit of, I always thought of myself as an explorer. I never wanted a straight path, and I never really wanted to do things that were expected of me. So I never had any issues just changing my mind and trying something else, or doing something crazy. So I try to instill that in my kids, and I try to instill that in the people who work for me and people I teach. Just, you've got to learn to be your biggest cheerleader, and give yourself that kindness to just explore life and take turns and take journeys, and try new things. It's you have a long life. You've got lots of time to do a lot of things. I think I'm on my fourth career, so just be nice to yourself.
Yeah. As we're wrapping up, Treveni, any last words of wisdom to share with the audience?
Not wisdom, but certainly words. But yeah, like Alissa said, she has children and gives advice, and I don't have children, but I still give advice. And I think the idea is that, you know, to echo everything everyone's already said, just be flexible. When I started my search for a data scientist role, like working at a place like Dataiku was like completely just not even on my radar. I didn't even know that there was a space for software around data analytics, you know? And by the time I was in my 8th month of searching, this opportunity landed on my plate, and I almost didn't even finish the application because I was so fed up with being on the market. And finally, I finished it and I finally got an offer. And so you just have to keep pushing, and it sucks. And I know that, like, I'm very aware of, I'm saying that because I'm like the biggest complainer and whiner, but like, you just got to keep going. And eventually it'll fall in place.
Thank you all so much. I really enjoyed this hour of conversation and enjoyed learning from you and experiencing your knowledge. Thank you to everyone in the audience for attending. I hope you all enjoyed this session, and have a great Tuesday night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.